Hi. This video was actually going to be two separate videos because, well, a lot of you already know that Hackmaster is my current favorite role-playing game. But the other day I was talking with Varg in one of my reviews. He mentioned homeschooling because he was playing Dungeons and Dragons with his children, but he didn't consider it to be, well, we all know that Dungeons and Dragons is an abstraction. It's not exactly the most simulationist game out there. So he didn't consider it like a very useful tool in homeschooling. And I mentioned Hackmaster because Hackmaster, within the fantasy context, it's a great simulation in my opinion, and contains many useful things that can be applied in real life. Varg asked why, and in this video I'm basically going to talk about what I like about Hackmaster and point out what I would consider some useful things in homeschooling. And well, many of you know as well that Varg is the designer of MYFAROG, and there are some similarities between Hackmaster and MYFAROG, not too many, but in the sense that they both attempt to be simulationist games, although MYFAROG has been streamed a bit so that it's easier to run for people who don't want to keep track of many things or do too many calculations, and it's focused more on the, I guess you could say it's a tribal mythological fantasy role-playing game, when Hackmaster is more of a medieval fantasy role-playing game. So this time, even though the games share some similarities, Hackmaster is quite different in theme and in the details and execution of different things, combat, character creation, etc. So this video is effectively going to be let's say an exposition or a display of what I think is Hackmaster's greatest virtues, perhaps. And it's also going to be a video response to Varg. And Varg also mentioned that he still considers MYFAROG to be like his tool as when it comes to an RPG that is useful in homeschooling. But it's not my intention to portray Hackmaster as a replacement of MYFAROG. I think they both have their own teaching niches, I guess you could say, or areas of expertise. So this is not an attempt to say that Hackmaster is better than MYFAROG. It's just me communicating why I think Hackmaster is my go-to RPG in homeschooling. Well, Hackmaster starts teaching you a lot since character creation. The character creation process is a great combination of a point-buy system with some random generation elements as well. You start to make decisions, getting some random results, spending some of your limited points to arrange different ability scores, choosing race and class. Everything feels like a combination of purchasing and working with what you get randomly. And you get many things, many useful data concerning, for example, biological differences. Usually those races that are smaller or shorter, they do not have as many hit points as some of the larger races, or they aren't as strong sometimes. So you start seeing all of these differences related to anatomy and physiology, more specifically. So this is a good way to teach someone that we are all different in our constitution. There are some similarities, but sometimes we are drastically different. And it also, but it also teaches you how to work with what you have, because in Hackmaster your character will have quirks and flaws. Many of those are mental and physical disadvantages. And even if you try to portray them as something positive, they are simply not advantages in different situations. So for example, even if your character is overweight or obese, he is going to be quite slow in combat situations. So you have to work with those flaws some of those flaws can actually be corrected through your adventures, because maybe your character has a phobia. He's afraid of, let's say, insects. So every time your character faces off against a giant spider, a giant beetle, or whatever, he could get like paralyzed when facing such threats. But after gaining experience points, you can use some points to purchase that flaw away. So you have a good list of quirks and flaws, such as maybe you are a bad liar, or maybe you are absent-minded, or maybe you're greedy, or maybe you have, maybe you're blind in one eye, maybe you are deaf, maybe you are sterile. You have different, as I was telling you, quirks and flaws. And so you use the points that you obtain from those quirks and flaws to purchase some other things, to become stronger in other areas. Because the more flaws that you take for your character, the more points that you get. There is a limit, and then you can use those points. And this is not an innovation, but I like it how that is in role-playing games. But I like it how Hackmaster integrates it with the random generation concept as well. So use those points to get other things, perhaps other talents and specializations, because you could be like, well, I'm not very good at this, so I'm going to specialize my character at that. And so you start building your fighters and your wizards and your rogues according to their strengths and weaknesses, and with the hope that maybe later on, if your character survives, you'll be able to get rid of those quirks and flaws. Not all of them, but there are some that you can, as I was telling you, purchase them away so that your character corrects those flaws. Now, something that I really like about Hackmaster is the way they handle ability scores. Some ability scores are pretty standard because, for example, strength will allow you to deal more damage and carry heavier things. But I really like it that, for example, intelligence and wisdom, they give you an advantage in combat. When it comes to intelligence, you have a bonus. If you have a high intelligence, you will be having an easier time fighting your opponent. You will have a positive attack modifier, and if you are not very smart, you're going to have a negative modifier. And when it comes to wisdom, you will get an initiative modifier that is negative or positive, depending if you have low or high wisdom. And also a defense modifier. So this integrates quite well with other things like dexterity or strength that are, let's say, more obvious when it comes to the advantages in combat, because dexterity also gives you an initiative modifier, an attack modifier, defense modifier, a dodge saving throw, a feat of agility bonus, etc. And I remember, I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago, when I was visiting Varg's channel, Fully and Perspective. I'm going to put a link in the description below. And things were pretty average, that is pretty normal, when you see Varg interacting with his followers as usual. And then one of his followers, I think he was a teenager, because there were a lot of teenagers in the channel. So he said something like, "I'm not very intelligent, but I'm really strong," or something. And Varg said, "That's okay. We can always use a fighter or a warrior or something." And as a martial artist, that made no sense to me. So I said, you need to be intelligent to be a capable fighter. But Varg said that he thought instinct had to take over, that you didn't need to be intelligent in combat situations, that you should be more instinctive. But I gave him some arguments and points. I don't know if I changed your mind, Varg, about that, but it's not of my concern. You can think whatever you like. But now I'm going to elaborate more on the side of intelligence and wisdom, and more than anything, using your intelligence in combat situations, and how Hackmaster translates that quite well with its modifiers and some advantages. Because you need to be quite intelligent and wise when fighting. When it comes to wisdom, you can identify things based on your good judgment, your sense of practicality, your understanding on the differences of emotions and feelings. You can set up some traps for your opponents. And just to put things into context, I'm a Mexican martial artist. I've been practicing and teaching martial arts for gets what would be like 20 years or more. Getting old. And I've been in there are some really beautiful places here in Mexico. I recommend that you watch the True Mexico channel. It's by a British man, an Englishman, and he talks about some very beautiful things here in Mexico, and I agree with him in almost all of them. But there are some places here in Mexico that are quite violent, and you simply do not want to visit those places even during daytime. So that's based on my experience and the experience of others. So when it comes to wisdom, as I was telling you, you kind of get a sense of a feeling or perceiving your opponent's intentions, and this is combined also with intelligence. With intelligence, you have to be quite analytical and reason what your opponent is trying to do. Why is your opponent reaching down into his pants? Does he have a knife or a gun? How is your opponent built? Do you think like he has these huge arms and very somewhat small legs in comparison? He's probably a boxer, or maybe he has a certain guard stance, or maybe he's putting his hip in front or his shoulder, and you can identify what types of strikes he's going to do. You can be thinking about, would it be convenient for me to try to grapple with my opponent? What if he has a body and he attacks me from behind? Should I put my opponent into a lock, or just grab him? What if he has, as I was telling you, some hidden weapon that he will use against you? Is your opponent taking some sort of drug or some enhancement that will inhibit pain? Because there are some techniques that are focused on just dealing a lot of pain to discourage your opponent, but sometimes that is not enough, and sometimes you have to identify and think. It's that sense of think on your feet or think quickly, and that requires quite a bit of intelligence. It's all about strategies and tactics, about if you're facing off against more than one opponent, which is a terrible situation, you should think about getting your opponents sort of like in a fishing line or in a bottleneck situation, so you're only fighting against one at a time, or trying to use one opponent as a shield. You should know when to go to more vulnerable areas, attacking all of those areas that are simply not allowed in combat sports. So all of that has to do with intelligence, controlling your breathing, positioning, and it depends on your studies of martial arts as well. You will have to choose certain techniques to counter others. Identify when it is actually possible to kick, because kicks are some of the riskiest movements in a self-defense situation. You can be taken down quite easily if you're not careful. There are just so many things related that the benefits that intelligence can give you, and wisdom in combat, based on also on memorization and how you use those that previous experience to come up with creative plans depending on the situation at hand. Because all of that has to do with because that was another point that said Varg, that something like, oh, combat is you just need to repeat things, and memory doesn't have to do with intelligence. But memory is basically like, would you say, your toolkit or your arsenal. You have all those things stored there, and you can take those, let's say, puzzle pieces and create new things with them, those building blocks, and create new ways in which you can solve problems, in this case saving your life in a combat situation. And this is obviously just talking about that is modern combat, that is in self-defense, martial arts, because Hackmaster is more focused on medieval combat with so many different types of weapons. And there is actually a specialization in unarmed combat in Hackmaster. It's a cleric in one of the supplements. I forget the name, but that's really cool. I never thought they would bring out some sort of like a monk type of character in Hackmaster. And of course, Hackmaster, as I was telling you, is quite realistic, so I doubt that that class will be quite useful against a Drake. Punching a Drake, I don't think so, unless you're using some sort of magical, some sort of spell or magical aid. As I was telling you, you're still within the fantasy context. And just for the record, I think that after watching some of Varg's sparring videos, I think that he, what would you say, outclasses most of the self-proclaimed expert swordsmen here on YouTube. So there is that. And I remember I did a video some time ago about the difference between parrying and blocking, because there are some that tell you that parrying and blocking is the same, and it's not. I'm going to put a link in the description to that video. And this is actually quite worrisome, because what if a person gets into a dangerous situation and starts using those so-called combat tips? And you could say, well, we're not using swords at this day and age or axes, but, well, it depends. In some places they actually use machetes, they actually use axes in some situations, that is chopping wood and such. But anything that you learn related to knife fighting or sword fighting can be translated or applied to other weapons, and take it from someone who has used improvised weapons in situations where life was at stake. So you can use sticks and metal pipes and broken bottles, and pretty much anything can be used as a weapon. And if you know how to use knives and swords, you can apply some of that knowledge with those improvised weapons. So there's that, and that's what I love about Hackmaster, that the combat is carried out in a second by second type of way. Each attack takes a number of seconds before you can use it again, kind of like a recharge. And this is just an abstraction as well, but I still like it how they try to approach that as realistically as possible. So for example, some attacks you will have to be really incompetent when carrying them out, because they simply take too many seconds to carry them out. So you swing a sword and then you have to wait like 8 seconds before you can swing it again. That would be someone who is somewhat inexperienced in fighting techniques, but I wouldn't consider it like you are just making one cut and that is it. Maybe you're making a series of thrusts and cuts and parries, and that's like the amount of seconds that passes between within the rhythm of attacks. And of course, shorter and lighter weapons allow you to attack several times. I think the shortest amount of time, if I'm not mistaken, is that 2 seconds between sequences of attacks. But it's really cool how Hackmaster handles it in almost in a second by second type of way. So it's really and combat can get quite lethal. Every time you take damage, there is a chance that you could pass out from the shock of the pain, or maybe there are many critical hits. There is actually an extensive table of critical hits depending on the weapon that you are using. You need to roll a 10,000 sided die. That is, of course, you have to. You're not literally taking a 10,000 sided die, but you have let's say, a way to figure that out. And there are so many results that you can end up with a crushed kneecap, or somebody could even decapitate you. Somebody could puncture your lung. There are so many lethal results. If you're lucky, you will only get like a cut that it's constantly bleeding and such. But every battle in Hackmaster is taken with great seriousness. I think that reflects real combat as well, because sometimes because not everybody is constantly engaged in a life or death struggle, sometimes people think like sport situations are similar to real life combat. And I'm going to put a couple of videos that are perfect examples of how combats can then end fast or quickly if the attacker knows what he or she is doing. Because for example, these 2 videos, I've heard people saying that, oh, they are fakes, but to me they don't seem fake. If they actually fake, they did a superb acting job. But let's take a look at this video. I'm going to put the link right here, where this Russian fighter is fighting against 3 opponents, and the conflict starts at mark 45. So you can see how, let's see, he takes a hit and he rolls with a punch, and he knocks one opponent, knocks out the other opponent. But if you make a pause at mark, let's say Let me see that mark. Oh yes, it's mark 48, around that. The second opponent actually clips his left knee with a kick. I think that left his knee quite stiff. And the third guy that he attacks, he's not able to use the entirety of his, put all of his weight behind that punch. You can see it happens at mark 57. He attacks his opponent, but he does little to no damage because just take a look at his left leg in that video. It's quite stiff because it has been a bit damaged by the other attacker. So it's a good thing that the others didn't try to attack him, because I think there was a pretty good chance of them overwhelming him. But as you can see, he took care of the other two guys relatively in a quick way, because he was smart, he was intelligent to target those specific areas in the face, because there are so many fragile areas in the chin and around the jaw that can result in a knockout. In some very weird cases, something worse. And that's a perfect example of Hackmaster combat. Sometimes you're fighting enemies and you get you strike the exact places and you get rid of them, knocking them out, or sometimes killing them. It depends on the weapon that you are using and the attack, etc. And look, there's also this other video. This one has also been labeled as a fake, and I'm going to put the link here, where this woman fights this larger opponent. Again, proving how you can defeat larger opponents if you are intelligent enough. And it happens at mark 40 of this video. You should play it in slow motion. If this is not fake, she attacked with a frontal kick to his solar plexus. It's a bit hard to tell because of the opponent is showing his back to the screen, but it definitely seems like that kick either hit his solar plexus or perhaps a bit below the navel. I would rather think it's the solar plexus, because you just hit yourself a bit in the solar plexus. You're going to just like knocking the door. You're going to see that it hurts quite a bit. Now imagine a bit more potence behind that. Not too many. It's not. You don't need too much to actually do some damage there. You can cause suffocation, and if you attack with enough potence, you can kill a person by attacking there. Again, Hackmaster reflects this quite perfectly with the bonus modifiers that provided by intelligence and wisdom in combat, because this applies to defense as well. If you are wise in the ways of battle or intelligent, you will be protecting your vulnerable areas, never exposing them. In this case of the woman kicking the guy there, I don't get why so many men like to do that. Like, they approach their opponents displaying their chests like, I'm a gorilla, I'm going to pound my chest, and that's so ridiculous, because you're exposing this entire area of the chest that is quite vulnerable, lethally so. So again, those are just some examples of that type of reasoning applied to combat. And that is not to say that at someone who is pathetically weak but very intelligent is going to be able to defeat a perfectly trained fighter who is, decently trained fighter who is not as smart. But if there are two fighters who are somewhat evenly matched, not so much, the more intelligent fighter is going to win, and the wiser fighter, of course. So, as I was telling you, I love that aspect of Hackmaster, of fighting second by second, and taking every hit into consideration, that it could be the thing that ends you. This is not a game where if you are a 10 level fighter, you're going to jump into the middle of a group of 5 orcs. One of those orcs could get lucky and he could defeat you with a single attack. The Hackmaster, you have to be really intelligent about your strategic and tactical approach. I remember the first time my players fought against this skeleton. There were actually 4 of them, and the skeleton got a critical hit against the gnome titan of the group, and he ended up with a hurt wrist that to this very day he has not managed to heal. They simply haven't found the right healer or cleric to cure that. So that's quite realistic. And the level of detail in combat is so amazing in Hackmaster. You have, for example, values. If you want to know how much damage you will deal when dropping heavy objects over your opponents, you can do that. After that encounter, players in other adventures try to trick mindless foes or undead into ambush type situations. Like, for example, they would all climb on top of some higher place, and they will gather rocks and things, and they would have a character luring the undead to that specific area, and they would drop objects and over the head of that opponent and that monster, and they would kill him in a relatively easy way. And so that's something that I really like about Hackmaster. And they also take a very realistic approach when it comes to the environment and the ground and the terrain. You have different modifiers related to attack, defense, and speed, and move adjustments and knockback effects as well. If you're fighting on, for example, firm level ground, of course it's going to be quite normal. But what if the ground is very slick, or maybe it's very steep, or maybe you have killed 2 or 3 opponents and you're fighting at top of their corpses? There's also a negative modifier to that. And you have basically all of the situations where you are fighting in mud or in water that gets to your waist. There are modifiers, and all of the adjustments are taken into account. And it's so satisfying to see how battles are so detailed, and you have all these situations that arise from such modifiers that when you actually talk about those encounters and those battles, it becomes into a really detailed description of such an encounter. And you have rules for so many things, I was telling you. And for example, let's say that Varg creates a character, and that character, let's call him the Count. And the Count is moving across the countryside. Maybe he reaches some sort of village or city. But what is that? He spots a church in the distance. It's the Church of the House of Shackles. That is Shackles with an A. I know what some of you are thinking. It's Shackles. So, for those of you that do not know what the House of Shackles is, it's one of the most evil churches in Hackmaster. They are known as the bringers of the new order and are bent on world domination, with the House of Shackles becoming the sole political, economic, military, and religious power throughout the world. They believe that they can and will conquer the world for their diabolical master. The bringers will do whatever it takes to attain this goal. So maybe Varg wants to... He created some heroic character and he wants to burn that church. So you have information on the flammability of all the materials in the structure. Maybe he's lucky and the church has a lot of wood and furniture and all that, and so the church is going to burn quite nicely. So all of the situations are covered. And when it comes to skills in Hackmaster, specialization is rewarded. There are so many skills because some games take a different approach, and that approach is fine if you want to play it in that style, but they have like a few skills for many different type of situations. But here in Hackmaster you have skills for almost everything: astrology, artistry, craft, current affairs, diplomacy, fast talking, fire building, forgery, gambling, leatherworking, etc. So for example, and maybe the Count is quite exhausted and hungry after burning that church. Maybe he wants to eat something. You have the cooking skill. Maybe he wants to prepare something using corn as a base, but maybe he doesn't like soft corn. He could use the cooking skill to cook some crispy corn, and so that will be one way of handling things, of using that skill. Oh, and there's actually the torture skill. So, for example, a very skilled torturer in Hackmaster will be able to deal enough damage to have the victim reveal enough information, but without dealing too much damage to the victim. So, well, nobody said that reality was pretty, and Hackmaster is a simulation of reality. So you have those ugly or controversial sides, but it's there because in Hackmaster you are probably going to fight villains, or perhaps it depends on your character class. Maybe you are an assassin or a ruthless fighter. You will have perhaps to torture some evil villain as to where the hideout of the group is or whatever. And so, yeah, those are just some things that I like about Hackmaster, but as you can see, a lot of them have great benefits when it comes to homeschooling. And I also love the sense of humor in the Hackmaster books. There are constant jokes, and they pretend as if this really, let's say, arrogant or haughty person is teaching you the game, because it's based on the comic The Knights of the Dinner Table. So it's Gary Jackson, the one who is supposed to have written the Hackmaster role-playing game, and he's constantly telling you things like, oh, like, you poor man, you have only played mediocre role-playing games, but now you have Hackmaster, the greatest role-playing game in the existence of mankind, and things like that. And for example, the Barbarian class cannot take first aid as one of its skills, because that's considered to be like womanly things, something that a manly man would not take. But of course they don't mean that, but they play around with those stereotypes. And so I love that sense of humor. And there is actually one wizard spell that it's basically like that musical that Tommy from The Who's, and it's basically the pinball wizard spell. You create this ball, the silver ball, and you shoot it out, and it starts bouncing all over the place, dealing damage, and your your wizard becomes deaf, dumb, and blind, like Tommy. And you are capable of slapping the silver ball with your hands as a wizard. So it turns the entire combat encounter into a pinball machine of sorts. So that's really funny. So there's a lot of detail in Hackmaster, and when it comes to the monsters that you kill, you have an extensive list with each of the monster entries contains all the information about that monster, of anything that it yields, from medicinal components to spell components, if you can use that monster as a trophy or collect its hide. And you could, for example, have information if you can eat that monster. So if you ever wondered if you could eat like a centaur or an elf in some desperate situations, yes, you can do that in Hackmaster, and you have information if that is actually considered cannibalism, because, well, centaurs kind of look like humans, and so yes, in some places, if you eat a centaur, you are considered a cannibal. And so it's that level of detail that I love about Hackmaster, and the simulationist aspects teach you a lot about life and how physics work in comparison, but again within the fantasy context. Again, for example, that spell of the silver ball of pinball, it's not too realistic, so you just have to be smart enough to tell the difference of what is possible or what isn't, all things considered context wise. And I also like the system of honor and fame. If you're constantly doing extraordinary things, you're going to become quite famous, and if you stop doing them, your fame will go down gradually. And when it comes to honor, it depends on your class, because, for example, let's say somebody challenges you to something or insults you or whatever. If your class is like a paladin, you have to fight then and there. But if you are an assassin, maybe you will wait later on, and you will kill the guy in the night and make sure everybody knows that something happened to the guy that insulted you. And so that's one way you can get honor. Sometimes it doesn't have to be that way. It could be actions related to how your character is supposed to act, because, for example, a mage who is constantly fighting up close and personal doesn't act like a mage, so they're going to be your party members are going to be thinking, this mage doesn't act like a mage at all, maybe he's not that good at spellcasting, and so your reputation, your honor could go down. Or maybe it's a sort of personal honor based on your roleplay, on the way you use your skills. And honor in Hackmaster is probably the most important thing to save you from certain death, because that's the thing, that the resources that you use to give you some positive modifiers or rerolls during different checks. So overall, these are just a few things that make me think that Hackmaster is a good tool for homeschooling. It teaches you a lot about realistic combat. It's not like I still enjoy many other games that are over the top, like Pathfinder and those games on the anime side of things. But of course, let's say you are teaching a very young person about combat, you're not going to be telling that person, oh, that's okay, you have the fit to whirlwind attack. You're going to be able to jump in the middle of 8 opponents and you're going to cut them all with a single cut. And no, but here in Hackmaster, it teaches you how to play smart. It also teaches you a lot about teamwork. It's quite impossible to go solo on Hackmaster. You need a group of at least, I would say 3, but that's still too risky. 4 is the best number, because you can get flanked, and the way they handle armor, that it's handled more as damage reduction. In fact, some of some enemies that will be a greater threat in other RPGs, like giant spiders and such, some of their sizes simply have no chance of fighting against someone in full plate mail. Not even with a critical hit, their fangs simply cannot penetrate the armor. But at the same time, armor makes you easier to hit. So for example, if you're fighting an ogre, maybe that damage reduction won't count for anything if he's wielding like a club the size of a tree. So in that way, perhaps a lighter armored character who has an easier time dodging and moving around will have an easier time fighting that ogre. So all of that is just so, I guess you could say, logical, so common sense. And all of those rules for moving in darkness, all of those rules related to starvation and dehydration, when you are traveling, all of those details when your character gets exhausted, because you cannot fight non-stop. It's in Hackmaster, it pays to take a short rest every now and then. If you're having battle after battle after battle, your character will have to make checks and you will get more and more tired, and you will suffer. It will be more difficult for you to be successful at those checks if you are wearing heavier armor, if you, as I was telling you, if you are overweight. And so in this game of Hackmaster, it actually pays, so it's actually convenient to have a dexterity-based character. If you like playing like a ranger or let's say a fighter thief, this is a great game to play such a character. If you put points on dodging and being nimble and you are lightly armored, it's actually quite possible to be successful in, let's say, in a frontline position. Not all of the time, of course, but with all things considered, that I was telling you that sometimes you face really large opponents that armor almost doesn't work against them. And there's a way to be successful as a dexterity-based character. And I could go on and on and on talking about Hackmaster and all of its intricacies and details. But overall, that's it. I consider it the best role-playing game in terms of homeschooling because of the way it teaches you about how things work in reality, the different specializations, and also teaches you how you should be smart in all situations. I've actually heard in present times people saying that there are places that in this planet that you do not need to be intelligent. Intelligent is useful in any setting, even in the most primitive places. You need intelligence to create useful tools, to prepare traps, to be mindful of the long-term effects of your actions. So, definitely Hackmaster is my number one homeschooling tool, in my opinion. I don't have kids. I have played at times with younger people briefly, just one shot, but if I ever have children, I'm going to use Hackmaster. I'm going to get them into Hackmaster immediately. And once again, I still recommend that you play MYFAROG if you're looking for a tribal mythological experience when it comes to fantasy RPGs. I also recommend that you check Varg's channel, Fully and Perspective. You'll find many different and unusual things in that channel. And this is coming from someone who disagrees with Varg in almost everything that he shares. I agree with him in some important points, but I always disagree with him, and I make sure he knows. So, Do check out Varg's RPG and his channel. And thanks for watching this video. Especially thank you, Varg, for asking that question. I hope I shared what I think about Hackmaster accurately in terms of homeschooling. I do not think Hackmaster is going to replace MYFAROG as a homeschooling tool, but I think it could be a good addition if you want to teach someone things related to life in general. Using role-playing games, Hackmaster is a great tool for that, in my opinion. So it could be like yes, an addition to the, that repertoire of homeschooling tools. Once again, thank you all for watching this video. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.